Have you ever wondered how pro runners can run so much and yet stay injury-free? Well, here's a little secret. It's in their shoes. Meet ENERTOR, the revolutionary running insole that absorbs 51% of the force of each foot strike. Designed for and with elite runners, ENERTORs not only protect you from injury, but also boost your energy return, helping you run faster for longer, pain-free.
With so many big names behind them, including Usain Bolt, I was keen to try them. If I'm being honest, I didn't think insoles were for me. I didn't think I needed them, but when I tried them, I was shocked because you really feel that energy return in every foot strike. It makes me feel really bouncy when I run, especially when my legs are feeling tired. Want to experience the ENERTOR difference? Try them out risk-free on their website with their 60-day money-back guarantee. And for our lucky listeners, you can use the code 5mileseasy at checkout for 15% off your order.
Unlock your running potential with ENERTOR insoles today.
If you go into any elite environment, you're often going to see a hydrotherapy pool. You'll see these Normatec boots. You'll have access to massage. You'll have access to ice baths, hot and cold contrast. I mean, they've been used for such a long time, so they must provide some element of benefit. I unfortunately see a huge amount of bone stress injuries, and it's a big link with low energy and insufficient fueling. I made a mistake a couple of weeks ago doing a heavy strength session, and then my diary changed, so 3 hours later I went on a tempo run and I tore my calf. So I think when you have the ability to just say, do you know what, I've done this event, I'm going to chill out, much more likely you're going to come back and you're going to come into the next block feeling better.
Welcome back to 5 Miles Easy. On the show today, we are back with running physio Aidan O'Flaherty. Aidan is back for round 3 on the show after already covering running injuries, strength and conditioning, and today we are going to be talking all things recovery. Steph, I've been so excited to do this episode because I think we as runners so often focus on the training and the hard sessions and think that's where the fitness comes from. But actually what I've learned, I think really only in the last 2 years since going pro, when I've had to focus on recovery more, is actually that time after the session, during the recovery, that we make those gains and we make the physiological adaptations that get us fitter. I think it's so fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's only when you make some small changes, like focusing on your sleep or your nutrition, that you realise how beneficial those things are and how much better you feel for putting more attention on them.
Absolutely. And I realise I'm in a privileged and slightly different position of having time to really recover in between my sessions. But a lot of people listening to this, I know, will be thinking, I don't know how I'm going to fit anything else into my schedule apart from the running that I'm doing. But that's where Aidan comes in today, because I know he's got loads of really great tips and just really small things that we can change to make big wins in our recovery.
Yeah, I'm really excited for Aidan to come back on because honestly, the number of things I've learned from him over the last few months, he's just a fountain of knowledge and he's so helpful in informing us of those small things that we can do to enhance our performance.
Right, should we just jump straight in?
Let's do it. Aidan, back by popular demand. This is your 3rd time on 5 Miles Easy, so welcome back again.
Thank you very much. Good to be back.
The last 2 episodes that we did with you, the first was on strength and conditioning and the importance of that for running. The second was on injury prevention. So today we're going to kind of incorporate both of those, but focus on recovery, what it is and why it's so important for runners. So I guess the first question is, what is recovery? Is it simply, taking it easy after a hard session, just, resting, or is there more involved there? Is there a key kind of definition of what recovery is?
I would always refer to recovery as restoring the body physically and psychologically. And when I try to educate runners and athletes about it, it is very complex, but the goal is we want to try and simplify it. So I'll often use like a pyramid, and I'm sure you'll have seen images of the importance at the bottom being like your sleep, mental recovery, downtime, nutrition, hydration. And then as you work up, you've got things like your cold compression, your massage, these are the supplements and your foam rollers, all of this kind of stuff. That's what I would often use with runners in terms of explaining what is important. Runners are very good at going to the top and not prioritizing the bottom, so they're always chasing that extra 1% without focusing on the big thing. That's what I would often try to help runners understand. There's one particular study I want to mention because I think we can refer back to this quite a bit. And there was a study done in the Australia Institute of Sport, the AIS, and they're very good at conducting research. They did a prospective study on track and field athletes. There was 33 athletes, and it covered them over 5 years. And what they found was those athletes that were able to complete 80% of their training week schedules, they were 7 times more likely to achieve their key performance goals. So that then comes back to, okay, well, for runners and athletes, we want to be available to train. But things that stop that are injury and illness, and a key component of that is the ability to recover.
Okay, so that kind of tells us why we need to be recovering to be able to hit our sessions. But from a physiological point of view, why do our muscles need recovery? What actually happens to our bodies when we're recovering well and when we're not recovering well? And we kind of talk a bit about absorbing training as well. That's kind of bandied around a lot, but what does that actually mean for our bodies?
So when we train, naturally, we put our body through stress. And you might get things like muscle soreness or DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. And people will often try and fast track that to be able to recover for the next session. That's not harmful for the body. We want adaptation. We want a bit of fatigue. So fatigue is not the enemy. We need an element of it for performance. But when we try to, let's say, hack biology, like we can't, like biology is biology, we can't trick it. It just needs to happen over time. But when we're trying to fast track this, it can often lead to people making errors and prioritizing what's key. So when we are running, our body's constantly remodeling. Things are breaking down, bones breaking down. Don't mean that in like physically breaking, but we have turnover where we get new bone comes in, clears out old bone. Same thing with muscle. We get small little micro tears in the muscle, and then those recover in order for us to be able to train. But if we're not prioritizing what is key for recovery, then that whole process gets slowed down, and then we can end up eventually leading into injury. So we all have like an envelope of function. And what I mean by that is we have a certain capacity that we can all tolerate. So my capacity versus two of you guys is my envelope is going to be a lot smaller. I can't run 9-10 times a week. I can't do 100 and plus miles per week. So I need to work within my envelope of function, whereas yours is slightly different because it's taking you guys a long time to build up to what you're currently able to do. So I think that's kind of a key thing that people need to understand, is that we all have a certain capacity. Once we exceed that, and recovery will play a huge role in that, which we'll delve into with different topics.
And what about when people say, you don't actually get fitter whilst you're doing the hard training? Because I think it's a good thing for people to know that actually when you're pushing yourself, it's not during that session that you're getting fitter. You're reaping the benefits afterwards, whilst you're recovering. So how does that work? What's happening to the body in terms of, as Rose said, absorbing that training?
I think it's a really nice segue into sleep. Right, so when we talk about, there's a professor, Shona Halson, she's one of the leading experts when it comes to recovery. And her, famous phrase is, we only benefit from the training that we're recovering from. So training is the stimulus. And then as we're recovering, we're adapting to that stimulus. So if we look at things like sleep, we have, it can affect like brain function, immune system, your muscle, your metabolism, and your mood. So if we look at like the brain side of things, we have the ability to cognitively function, decision making, reactive time. So if we're not recovering, we're going to affect those things. And then when we look at mood, think about when you've been training really hard, how irritable sometimes you might get if you're not recovering. If you've got people bothering you with work calls, etc. Well, obviously for you, Rose, you might not have that now because you're a full-time athlete. But for me and you, Steph, and most people that are listening, we have other jobs. And I know you'll have obviously a lot of people bothering you as well with the Olympics. But that stuff, if we're a bit irritable, we know, okay, perhaps maybe we're not recovering effectively. So it can massively affect things like anxiety and depression. We know that those people who don't tend to sleep as well the risk of developing these things are greater. But also those people who have that are less likely to sleep well. So it comes from both sides. And then we have things like your musculoskeletal. So we have your kind of bone, tendons, muscles. So we release hormones as we sleep to help these things recover. So if we're not prioritizing sleep, then all of these functions are getting affected. Therefore, we're not adapting. And then what happens is your envelope of function reduces, and then you're likely going to enter that risk of picking up an injury quicker than someone who, say, is prioritizing that stuff.
I find sleep so fascinating. I'm a bit obsessed with it. And you're right, it's just, I feel like it makes such a huge difference to me. Even if I just have a 20-minute nap after my session. Beforehand, I will just be completely useless. 20 minutes and I will be a new person. But you mentioned there about almost a vicious cycle with sleep, and it can be hard to sleep after really hard training sessions, but then you're not recovering and then you're not able to hit the next hard training session. How do we improve that? What do you do? I mean, this is such a big topic. We could do 10 episodes on this, but what do you personally do that you find helps your sleep after hard training?
Yeah, so it's key we can talk about it a lot, but we want to have practical applications. How can people listen to this and take away okay, I'm going to try this over the next couple of weeks? So one thing is behavior change, right? And that's not easy. So we want to be consistent and persistent about the message of sleep. And it is happening more. Athletes are speaking about it more with the different wearable devices, etc. But we see consistently in the research, those people who sleep 7 hours or less are much more likely to pick up an injury. And with adolescents or younger athletes, it's 8 hours or less. Naturally, they'll sleep a little bit longer. Number one thing is looking at the duration of sleep. How long is someone sleeping? We have this, particularly with individual sports, it's different than team sports. Team sports, they tend to train at different times. Individual sports like running, we want to get up early. We set our alarm clock to train before we go into work. And often we tend to neglect sleep as a result. So people will set their alarm for 5 a.m., train, then go to work. So one key thing is looking at your duration of sleep. How many hours are you sleeping? The other key thing when it comes to sleep is looking at the consistency. Are you going to bed at the same time? Are you waking up at the same time? It's kind of like a two-step model. You have what's referred to as like homeostatic drive and your circadian rhythm. So naturally, the homeostatic drive, the longer we're awake, the more sleepy we feel. You have the circadian rhythm, which is like a body clock. And humans and runners, we're very good at affecting those two things. You made a great point, Rose, about having your nap at a certain time. What that does is that will make you less sleepy. So therefore, like cognitively, you might be a little bit sharper, you go and train. But if you sleep for too long in a nap, in the night, you're going to be less sleepy, so you might not get to sleep as quick and the quality might be reduced. And then with the circadian rhythm, we're all guilty of being on the phones, right? Blue light, we know, can massively affect the sleep latency, which is the time it takes for you to get to sleep from being awake. So blue light exposure late at night is something that can impact that. So we refer to sleep hygiene. We want to look at the individual. What areas can we work on? Are you on your phone late at night, Steph? Are you in bed scrolling through something? Yeah. And the same for Rose. You know, what things are you having caffeine a bit too late in the day? Are you going to bed at different times where you don't have that consistency? So it's looking at the individual and those kind of certain areas and then try to put a plan in place for those.
Do you think wearables are helpful for that? Because, I mean, I say it because I'm absolutely obsessed with my Oura Ring. And the first thing I do in the morning when I wake up is sync the data and like check how I've slept. I think sometimes it has a negative effect because you're almost relying on what that's telling you to dictate how you feel for the day. You know, I may have woken up actually feeling all right and then it tells me I've not slept well. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not meant to feel okay today. So what are your views? Do you think they're helpful tools to have to help track sleep and other areas of recovery, or do you think they're a hindrance?
I think there's definitely pros and cons. So I guess to start with, the pros are it gets people talking about sleep. It gets people thinking actively about recovery. So that's definitely a good thing. And then we also have, we do know that they are useful at telling us like the duration of sleep and time we go to sleep. So we can see clear patterns. The other thing is that, are they valid? Is looking at whatever you're using, whether it's Whoop or Oura. So they don't tell us their algorithms because they don't want other people to take them. So it's difficult to validate these against what we refer to as the gold standard. So the gold standard for sleep is polysomnography, I think it's referred to. So that's like where you go in to these labs and they hook you up to all these wires, measures brain activity, electrical, muscle, EMGs, that kind of stuff. We know that we can't really validate them against these gold standards. Some of them have, but the key thing is looking at your duration of sleep, the time you go, the time you wake up. And usually I think it's around 2 cycles of sleep. It can be a bit more accurate rather than breaking down the further cycles. So it's useful for that. But you made a great point, is that we can become obsessive. There's numbers attached to it. So some people, let's say, Rose, right, you wake up in the morning, you're going to run the marathon and your Whoop or your Oura tells you, oh, you're not recovered. How's that going to make you feel on the day, right? Not great. So it depends on the individual and how you perceive these numbers. You know, you might have had a great sleep, but you wake up and your watch tells you, oh, you're not yet recovered. but you feel amazing. So I think it's using it to inform rather than to make absolute decisions on your training. So I think it's very useful for that, but it depends on the individual. It is very easy to become obsessive of these numbers, and that then can lead to anxiety, which can lead to reduced sleep quality. So there's definitely pros and cons of those devices.
Is there what would be better, like sleep duration or wake sleep time? Because I've had so many different views on it.
Yeah, in terms of like my knowledge and not going that in depth, I wouldn't know as much as some of the top researchers in the field. But you have different cycles. You have your non-REM, which I think is broken down into 3 to 4 cycles, and then your REM, which is the rapid eye movement. And most of your sleep duration will be in that final stage of the non-REM from my reading anyway. So I think they're both important, but I'd be looking at the duration of sleep really is the key thing for us to look at, because we don't know how valid each of those stages are against the gold standard. So we don't know how accurate they are. So look at the duration. I think if you're using those wearables, that would be one thing that I'd look at. And yeah, not to get too bogged down on if it tells you you're not recovered, but you feel good. So I think using things like questionnaires are really useful alongside it. So you can have those very good valid questionnaires asking, on a scale of 0 to 10, rate your sleep. How do you feel today? What's your mood like? What's your irritability like? These types of questions can go very well hand in hand with these devices.
So if sleep is at the bottom of the pyramid that we spoke about earlier in terms of recovery tools, what would be the next level up? What else can we do to recover better?
So I think things like mental recovery, like having downtime, and it might be different for each individual. So some people might, enjoy watching a bit of TV, making sure it's not too late at night before you go to bed, and maybe not working too late before you go to bed. So having downtime, whether that's active recovery or just relaxing or just rest. And then we all know, which is very important, is your nutrition and your hydration. So we see consistently within the research low energy availability. So which essentially means that we're not taking on enough calories, and that can massively affect performance and also injury, particularly like bone stress injuries with female athletes as well as male athletes. So nutrition is definitely going to be the next thing up from the sleep that we want to be prioritizing.
With nutrition, in terms of recovery, so say you've just done a really hard session and then you prioritize getting in carbohydrates with some protein afterwards, what's happening to your body then in terms of it repairing and it refueling?
Yeah, so we need this fuel for the body to adapt. And I think another topic that this ties in with is people who have perhaps maybe, if you look at like their relationship to exercise, some people when they might be picking up an injury, might continue to train anyway. We've all ended up, I think, in that. But when it comes to the nutrition side of things, some people might not prioritize that, and they'll prioritize, for example, just going for a run or maybe going for a walk, hitting their step count, and not actually prioritizing downtime. So I think looking at the individual and their relationship to exercise is also going to be important. But to answer the question, yeah, we take fuel on because it helps repair bones, it helps repair tendons, muscles, and it's looking at obviously what you're eating as well. So the micronutrients of the food. Balance is key. On that, as we mentioned, the two different types of runners that we tend to get, which kind of links into everything, is you have people who are obsessively passionate about running and those who are more, we refer to as like harmonious. So those people who are a bit obsessive, running controls them. They know that they might be picking up an injury and therefore they might neglect recovery or the ability to take a step back. So they just keep on training. I think most runners end up in that place at one point in time. Like I've definitely ended up there. And then what we want is a bit of more of a harmonious kind of passion, which refers to we can take a step back when we feel like we need to recover. Like, have you ever been training where you felt like I feel quite fatigued. I feel my mood is a bit low. And have you ever taken a step back and said, I just need a bit of downtime to either of you? Have you
recently.
Ever been in that?
Yeah. Last few weeks I've had to do that.
Yeah.
So,
and what were those, like for you, what were those kind of like signs that made you think, okay, I need to take a step back?
I think, as you said, I've definitely been the person before that would keep trying to push through that. But I think just over time with experience and knowing what's healthy for me and that trying to look at the bigger picture, that I want to be running for years to come, and this is only a small moment in time, that it's not important, and I'd rather kind of work out what's wrong, be healthy. And again, from experience, I know what feels normal and doesn't feel normal for me. So the fatigue that I've been feeling definitely doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel like I've got tired legs from doing loads of mileage, because I'm used to that. It feels like something else. So I knew something wasn't quite right.
Yeah, so you have the ability to take a step back and look at it objectively. A lot of people, and it takes time. Maybe previously you might not have done that, but it takes, like, we tend to learn the hard way, right? We pick up injuries and we reflect and we think, okay, maybe I should have not done those speed sessions that week. Once we're able to look back at it and then adapt the training going forward, that will help with longevity and successful outcomes. So I don't think we're one or the other. I think we tend to slide between the two, but definitely want to end up more towards that. Okay, I have control of running. It doesn't have control of me. And obviously for performance, you do kind of need to be pushing the boundaries a little bit, but it's finding where that line is.
I think that's such an interesting point, because I guess it's a bit of a sliding scale, and there's definitely an element to, I mean, from my own experience, I've had the starts of injuries, and I think, well, if I just stop now, I might get through it in a week or 2 weeks of kind of slightly uncomfortable running, and I might come out of it the other side, and then I haven't lost that training. And yeah, to some extent that is obsessive, but as you said, you kind of also need that for performance, and I would be missing out on that performance if I didn't have it. And obviously it is also my job, but for other people out there who are not professional, their goals are still equally as important. And if you've got a big race coming up that you've worked so hard for, it is so hard to just take that step back sometimes.
Yeah, and it comes back to that study I mentioned about the 80% of training weeks. So it was over, like, say, 6 months as it built into these major world championships, and that 20% was equal to 5.2 weeks of training. So if we adapt and we have the ability and we still miss out on those 5.5 weeks, let's say, we still have a 7 times greater chance to be able to hit those key performance goals that, like, it might be a PB. It might be someone racing, I think it scales down to the recreation athlete and sub-elite. They might want to run their first 10K in a certain time, or half marathon or marathon. It scales down to these as well. So having the ability to say, okay, if I pull back slightly now, prioritize recovery, rather than going a bit too far beyond that line, chances are you might end up, you might pick up an injury that might keep you out for 2 or 3 months. So yeah, it highlights that key point as well.
That's such a good point. And if you look at it that way, the amount of sessions that you can miss and still hit those key goals is so interesting.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that also links into just having the confidence in that stat, and having the confidence that if you do miss a key session, it's not going to be the end of your race and the end of your performance. But
absolutely,
as hard as that can be in the moment.
Just on that, as you mentioned that, I think when you look at, like, recovery, if you look at a training program and you look at someone's, let's say a coach sets you a plan, you'll often get set recovery run, right? Which is, go out and run easy. What's not scheduled into it is actual recovery. Again, it comes back to that consistent, persistent message of, okay, you need to be sleeping adequate amount, you need to be fueling adequate amount. And there was a consensus statement brought out in 2018 saying that we should be programming recovery into your training. I don't know if you've ever seen a program where it breaks that down and what's important. Some of them do, some of them don't. But I think when people look at a recovery run, okay, that means I'm recovered. I've done my 30-minute recovery run. But actually, it's look at those bigger things that we need to be prioritizing.
Yeah, it's interesting because, a lot of people have a coach who sets them the training, the hard sessions, the easy runs, but they might not be experts in the other area, so they could advise, but it's, I guess, hard to get. It's all about knowledge. And I mean, that's why I guess having a podcast like this is very useful, because you're learning these things. But just having a coach, I guess it's hard to program every little bit if they don't specialize in every area.
Yeah.
So it's just learning it and knowing how to prioritize.
I mean, I'm on my running journey and I'm learning all the time. When I should be doing certain things around certain sessions, I've made mistakes and I'm trying to adapt. But like you said, we can't know everything. But that's the enjoyment of running, because we're always developing, and the body's always, the body has the ability to adapt once we're alive. So which is an exciting thing. No matter how old we are, as we age, we can still adapt. You see people running in their 60s, 70s, like you said. You want to be able to run when you're older. It's longevity. But we know these things as they happen, but sometimes we don't actually make the changes. And that's where it comes down to, okay, well, what's stopping the individual from doing that?
It's time to thank our sponsor for this episode, Veloforte.
Now, as our listeners will know by now, we are both big fans of using the Veloforte products in our training. And I have to say, Steph, I had a really hard session today, and all I could think about in those last couple of reps was having a malto shake at the end. The cold cinnamon and vanilla shake at the end of a hard session just hits differently.
Oh, it tastes so good, doesn't it? I've been absolutely loving the energy chews. They're a great alternative to gels, and I've been using them on those longer runs, especially in my training for Two Oceans. They came in very handy, and they're so delicious. I love the apple and cinnamon flavour.
And the best bit is, because Veloforte uses only real food ingredients and nothing artificial, you can trust what you're putting in your body, and it digests so much better to synthetic alternatives.
And you can understand every ingredient on the back, which is not always the case with these types of products.
Thanks to Veloforte for supporting this podcast. And if you would like 30% off the Veloforte products, head to veloforte.com and use the code 5miles at checkout. And what about those recovery runs? What should they look like? And how do we know if we're running them too hard, too easy? I mean, can it ever be too easy?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say it can ever be too easy. It's like rest is rest. Recovery is recovery. I think a recovery run is just another run. It's another run that you're getting more miles into the legs. When you look at what people would see the purpose of it being is like active recovery. So it stimulates blood flow. It could potentially reduce like muscle soreness. Therefore, you feel a bit better the next session. When we have things like DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, that can often affect power output. Let's say if you were in the gym and you're doing a new exercise, you feel quite sore after it. Going on a nice easy run can help reduce that before you go and maybe do a tough session. So Rose, like when we were going back to when we started your S&C, some new movements, and you're probably thinking, okay, my legs are sore. But over time, your body is adapted. And now coming into the Olympics, it's like, okay, well, and it's same for any athlete. No, it's right. No, let's make sure we reduce the amount of load and we prioritize what's key, those sessions that you want to get in. So it's the recovery runs are there for you to feel better after. If you're doing a recovery run, you feel worse, then it's not going to give you any benefit.
That's interesting. And also what you said about when your muscles are sore, a recovery run can help, because what I was wondering is, I might do a hard session in the morning, and most of the time I'll do like a shakeout in the evening, because for me, I feel like that helps me feel better the next day. But actually, what's the difference between doing that and just resting and recovering?
Yeah, great question. And what I would look at is, how is the individual feeling? So you could feel stiff and sore, or you could feel a bit fatigued and irritable. So if you're if you're a bit stiff and sore, a bit of movement is not going to do any harm. Spin on the bike for 10, 15 minutes, go for a walk or go for a nice easy run. Obviously at your level, you're doing double run days, so you know your body well. But for someone else, if they're not used to double run days and they run, they can go on an easy bike or easy walk. But if you feel tired and irritable, you might be better off to just have a bit of downtime, stay at home, rest, fuel, get to bed that little bit earlier. So it depends on what your body is feeling. It's like, as I said, it's different from feeling like stiff and sore. Okay, go and move easy. If you're feeling tired and irritable, then you're better off. I don't think that you might benefit from it, but my priority would be, okay, let's get some good food, let's sleep, and let's have a bit of chill time.
And what about moving up the pyramid? So if you're getting sleep, nutrition, downtime right, then what about the 1%, the ice baths, the compressions, saunas? What do you think works and what doesn't?
Yeah, so there is some good evidence out there, or better evidence out there on these things now versus what there was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So let's say you are prioritizing the bottom of the pyramid, and then you can work your way up. Lots of these things is down to kind of perception, sensory. So you feel better after, if you get a massage, you feel good after. So if you feel good, you might move a little bit better. You might, let's say if someone feels a bit stiff and sore and tight when they're running, it might potentially alter their mechanics. So if you feel good, you might move a little bit better. When you look at things like compression garments, So you have let's say you have your compression leggings. You then have the pneumatic ones, which are like the Normatec boots, or those are the recovery boots. And then you have water or cold compression water. So that's, they all have like this pressure, like hydrostatic pressure in water. So with the compression garments, such as like your leggings, they will produce around 20 millimeters of mercury in terms of pressure. Your pneumatic ones, they have generally up to around 100 millimeters of mercury in pressure. And then water, depending on how deep you're submerged, is 150 millimeters of pressure. So if you're looking at those, then water is arguably more effective, but not everyone has time to get an ice bath. They don't have access to an ice bath, or they don't live near the sea, unless you want to jump into the Thames here. Good luck to you. So therefore then these Normatec boots are quite useful for feeling a bit better, or those compression garments. I know when I am after a hard session, I might sometimes use these compression leggings and I feel good for it. But it's not to say, oh, my legs are recovering better. It's more about the sensory side of things and how it makes you feel, rather than like the actual biology of what's happening. Although there's an element of it, but it's nothing like what things like the bottom of the pyramid are going to give you.
Yeah, so when you say feel better, is that it's more mentally rather than physically?
Well, both. Because psychologically, you might, okay, that felt good. And then physically, your legs might feel less sore. So like foam rolling can reduce the perception of muscle soreness, and that can make you move. So that's physical, but also psychological. But it's when people then go to that rather than looking at the other side of things, you know, they're fighting a losing battle. But when you do it the other way around, then I do think that these things have a lot of value. If you go into any elite environment, you're often going to see a hydrotherapy pool. You'll see these Normatec boots. You'll have access to massage. You'll have access to ice baths, hot and cold contrast. And I mean, they've been used for such a long time, so they must provide some element of benefit.
What about hot and cold? Is that again a bit of a sensory thing, or does it actually reduce inflammation, increase blood flow, and have a physiological?
Yeah, great question. You can look at, when we look at things like heat, it can be a stimulus in terms of like heat adaptation. Like for example, competing in, we'll use the Olympics because it's around the corner. It's going to be hot in Paris, so people will be prioritizing that heat adaptation. So it can be a stress as well. So doing things like sauna and doing it for a long period of time, that can give you some element of adaptation to help with performance. But then if we do too much of it, it's how is it going to help with recovery? Is it going to hinder recovery? So it's a big question to ask. When you look at contrast, generally it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So let's say you do 4 minutes in cold water, do 4 minutes in hot. And that can have a positive impact again on your perception. And, you know, with the hydrostatic pressure, it can help a little bit with blood flow, but also so can walking. It's your heart that pumps the blood around the body. So I think your contrast is useful. 10 minutes cold, 10 minutes hot, 5 minutes cold, 5 minutes hot, whatever you decide to do. When it comes to things like cold water, if you're dipping your feet in for like 30 seconds, you're getting that pressure for 30 seconds. It's not going to be as beneficial as going in, let's say, for 11, which is recommended around 11 to 15 minutes. And usually the temperature of water, 11 to 15 degrees. So they say for every degree of temperature, 1 minute. So you see some people dip into the water, they come back out. How much of a physical benefit is that going to provide? I think it's more like psychological. Oh, you jump into the water, you get back out, you feel good after it.
So I guess now we know what's kind of more important in terms of prioritizing for recovery. But as a physio and strength and conditioning coach, what's the most common thing you see people neglecting? Is it those most important things like sleep and then nutrition? What is it that you're seeing?
It really is. And I know it sounds like it sounds obvious and basic, but it is down to not sleeping sufficiently, and perhaps the quality of sleep isn't as good. So when you don't sleep as well, is what the key difference is your perception of effort during your training session. So let's say you've traveled, or let's say you go on training camp, or you're traveling on a holiday and you don't sleep as well, or you feel really stressed at home and you go and you do a session. Often, if you have a reduction in sleep, you're going to feel particularly fatigued during that session. So that can affect like power output and potential risk of overloading, or frustration as well of not hitting the times that you want to. So your perception of effort, that's one key thing that I would look at is within someone's training is you often tend to see a trend when someone comes in with an injury. You look back at the training like, yeah, I started to feel like pretty fatigued on that Tuesday track session. Or if I look at how I was, say, 4 weeks ago, that felt a lot easier than what it was last week. And potentially then that person is, overreaching, they're perhaps maybe doing a bit too much and not prioritizing the recovery. And then the fueling. I unfortunately see a huge amount of bone stress injuries, and it's a big link with low energy and insufficient fueling. And people get up in the morning, they go for a run, they don't fuel before they run. I know we spoke about this before, but those things are the key things when it comes to recovery. And then picking up the likelihood of picking up an injury is going to increase quite a bit.
It's such a hard one because I appreciate so many people listening to this will have full-time jobs and it's fitting everything in, and we struggle to fit training in, and then there's this whole other element of recovery that we need to schedule in as well. What do you recommend in terms of scheduling? How do we figure out when to do our hard sessions, when to do easy sessions, when to recover?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an individual question, depends on the person, right? And also their level of ability, how much that they're running. But let's say you have a really tough Monday, you got an easy run, and then Tuesday is your hard run. You're not going to go out and do a tough run on the Wednesday because you need adequate time to recover from that. Now, you might have a runner who will like heavy stacking maybe a couple of days. They want those few days to be really hard, and then the follow on from that is going to be pretty easy. But that takes experience to get to that point. So I would say for someone who's thinking about their scheduling, try and have 24 hours before and after a really tough session. So let's say you decide I've got a really hard strength session to do on a Monday, and then make sure that, let's say you do it Monday evening, you don't want to have a hard run on the Tuesday morning. Try and give yourself at least 24, maybe even 48 hours if you're new to it. Give yourself that a little bit longer. So the longer you have between those hard sessions, ideally the better for someone who's new to it, because it'll give you sufficient time to recover. But if you're more experienced, you can play around with it a little bit. Some people like to do their hard strength sessions and maybe a track session on the same day. But I made a mistake a couple of weeks ago doing a heavy strength session, and then my diary changed. So 3 hours later, I went on a tempo run and I tore my calf. Again, not listening to my own advice, but I looked back at it and I thought, okay, it's quite obvious, but now that I've made that error, you can be sure my chance of making that again going forward will be a lot less. And there'll be other things that will contribute to that as well. Perhaps maybe stress, not just the strength and the hard run, but it was a big factor.
That's interesting. So you would say, because a lot of people talk about keeping the hard days hard and the easy days easy, which for a lot of people would mean doing a session and then gym on the same day. But would you say it's actually better to space them out and have more hard sessions, kind of more days that have hard sessions on, but that are more spaced out?
Yeah, potentially, again, depending on the individual. But if you're yourself, Rose, who's experienced, you have the ability, is it fair to say you have the ability to maybe recover after you do a hard run for what you might have later that day? So let's say you do decide to do a really hard day, how you fuel after the first session is going to be recovery for that session, but also to prepare you for the next session. So this opens up a nice topic of recovery periodization. Like, we periodize our training or strength training or running. Why not periodize our recovery? And Professor or Dr. Shona Hadson speaks about this regularly. So if you know that you have a couple of hard days or a hard day, okay, you want to be sure that leading into that you're getting your sleep. So you're prioritizing and you're periodizing, right? And that's going to, not to say that it is never important, but we put a bit more emphasis on it. So if you've got a really hard day, right, leading into that, I want to be fueling well, I want to be sleeping well. After doing my session, I'm prepared enough that I can take on the right nutrition. Therefore, I feel better going into that session. Whereas if you're not sleeping, let's say you're getting 6 hours sleep and you have done for a number of nights before that hard day, and you, for whatever reason, don't have the nutrition with you after your training session, or when you go into work, you've got a busy day, so you're not having lunch, you're skipping a meal. That then is likely going to lead to, over time, that will your chance of getting injured are going to be higher. So periodize the recovery if you're going to do that by prioritizing what's important. But if you're new to running, I think spacing out those harder sessions is going to be better. The more experienced you are, then I think you can have a bit more, I don't want to say room for error, but you know your body a bit more, and you've built up to be able to do that.
It must be so individual on mindset as well, because I was just thinking about how I feel on those harder days. And I feel like on my hard days, I'm kind of accepting today is the day that I'm working hard. And then I know the next day I can take it easier. So I kind of look forward to that. But I'm all in on that hard day. So if I did a session in the morning, then I'm really committed to that day where I guess, like you said, it might be with the experience that I can recover enough to do the strength in the evening. But I'm kind of mentally prepared to do that. Whereas the next day, I might not be as motivated because I'm thinking, oh, I'm tired from yesterday. I want it to be an easy day today. And, I might not be in the mood to go to the gym. So I do think it must be quite, individual and on your mindset as well for each day.
Yeah, like the structure, knowing in advance. Like I always say, a training plan and having structure is key because it minimizes error. If you're someone who just does things a bit ad hoc and doesn't have structure, the chances of you making a training error, i.e. maybe you make the error, you pick up an injury and you look back and you think, okay, why did I do a hard session and those 2 days really close? Whereas if you plan out your sessions, then you're thinking about, okay, if I've got a hard day on the Tuesday, okay, I can look forward to an easy day on the Wednesday. So I think having that and also being flexible with it as well. So I agree, having that structure allows you to mentally prepare for those days that are going to be hard and you look forward to it. When you do your easy days, you go easy. So then on the hard days, you can push. A lot of runners end up coming into the middle zone. Like they don't tend to, on those harder sessions, they're unable to reach, say, the heart rates or the paces because maybe they've not been prioritizing their recovery or going a bit too hard on the easy day. So you end up like back into this kind of the black hole of training intensity, as a famous guy, Dr. Stephen Seiler, refers to it as. We want to be able to push hard and then we want to have that kind of bandwidth between the two.
I think it's such a good point about structuring your recovery, and actually it's just becoming more conscious of it. And I have found I used to have pretty terrible recovery because I was working, and so I'd run first thing, then have to go into the office, and my work schedule was all over the place. And it's something I've definitely had to work on. I mean, obviously it's a lot easier for me now because I have time, but I also had to really adjust my mindset on it and plan. And I think that's been the key for me, is planning my recovery so it then becomes a habit. And so I now automatically make sure I have time after my sessions. Steph will probably laugh at this because I'm not great at it all the time, but I try to make sure I have time after my sessions where I have a bit of downtime, so I'm not getting back and having like 10 minutes to turn around, get out of the house again. And I'll make sure I have my shake with me after my session, but I think so much of it does just come down to planning. Yeah, so
what gets planned gets done, right? And if, for runners having, and I know listening, it might sound like a lot you need to think about, but actually, once you look at what really works, it's cheap and effective, right? Sleep doesn't cost you a huge amount, does it? And also, fueling and eating well. People often say, oh, to eat well costs expensive, but you can go and you can get veg and your protein in certain places that are not too expensive, but planning it is going to be key. And I think the other key thing as well is the environment that you're in. So like, when you're going to bed at night, making sure that you've got, a clean room, it takes away that kind of stress. And you've got, nice lighting where it's quite dim. Again, looking at their circadian rhythm. When it gets darker, we feel sleepy. When it's light, we feel awake. So waking up to some natural light is going to be good. So having an environment, and also stocking up your cupboards with good food. Setting your environment sets the intention. And I think that's a key thing. Like when you go to the Olympic Village now, there'll be loads of other athletes who'll be staying with someone else, so you want to be there making sure that, okay, you're happy with how the room is, and maybe taking your own pillow or something like that. And it might be, you can relate that to anything. If you're going traveling, you might have certain things within the room that might make you feel a bit better, like your own pillow or whatever it might be. But I think the environment is another key factor as well.
I wish I could take my pillow everywhere.
There's actually a lot of research in that with sleep, and we get told about it because of the Olympic Village and because it's all going to be a very new environment. But if you can get a few things like a pillow or like a scent, works very well, that you have at home and then you can take with you, it helps your body just relax and not go into that kind of on alert mode because it's in a different place with other people in the room and lots of other kind of different things around you.
Absolutely. And just to touch on that as well, it's different for the marathon because it's one day, but obviously you have to prepare for it in terms of your sessions. If you've got someone who is going through rounds of like the 1500 meter, Georgia Bell on here recently, they've got to do, to get through to the semis, then to the final, you've got to go through rounds. So if you think of like Athling Moen, unfortunately with her incident where she tripped up, that the ability we know by not sleeping, it affects that reactive ability. So all of these things, all of these small little things can lead to a massive impact on someone's outcome, not just in the Olympics, but when it comes to someone preparing for a marathon, you want to turn up to the start line, you want to be making sure that, okay, you've got all of your kit, you know how to get there. Not like me when I was in the London Marathon, getting down to Greenwich, I'll be fine, I'll just follow everyone. And I was getting there and thinking I'm going to miss my start wave. Being organised is important. Yeah.
So reducing the stress. Control the controllables.
Yeah.
So what about after races? What are the do's and don'ts there in terms of recovery? And when should we, I think a really common thing is knowing when to run again and when it's actually going to help us feel a bit better and when it is, as Steph touched on earlier, better just to rest. Yeah,
so again, depending on the event and the duration and how much stress that your body has been placed under during that, but ultimately go off like how your body is feeling. So naturally after an event, you're going to be on a high, and then a couple of days after, your body will just start to kind of crash a little bit. You'll feel fatigued and you'll feel sore and you'll feel achy. So doing some easy movement is naturally going to be good, but I'd often see the mistake where I see on Strava, and I know an athlete has done a really tough race, and then I see them within that week putting in big sessions, and it's only a matter of time before I can see them put up something on social media about they picked up an injury. I think that then comes back to that individual's, their relationship with the sport and exercise. Are they a little bit obsessive? Do they use it as a bit of a crutch? So I think when you have the ability to just say, do you know what, I've done this event, I'm going to chill out, much more likely you're going to come back and you're going to come into the next block feeling better. I've seen it with a lot of athletes that I treat, the sub-elite category where they're trying to maybe get into an England vest or they're running competitively for a club, where I see after they've done a really good marathon or half marathon, and then I've seen them going into other marathons where they reflect and they say, this isn't going well, I've not taken enough time after. It depends on how long it is, but if you're looking at a marathon, a couple of weeks of just take things easy, chill out, enjoy a bit of tone time, reflect on the race, and enjoy what you've just been through. Because some people do have this bit of a dip in mood. I'm the opposite. I feel great. I'm like, no, I can chill out. I don't have to train as much, and then I can get back into it. But yeah, I think listening to your body and how it feels, you'll know when is the right time. But when you go back into it, it's always just best to start off with easy running for a number of weeks before you start doing any sort of intensity.
And planning that in advance, because I think, as you said, if people jump straight back into the hard sessions, they might have booked in a race like a few weeks later, and they've clearly not planned, actually, I need this time to recover first before I can even get back into training, let alone target the next big race. There's not enough time.
Yeah, so when you're sitting down with your coach or you're planning your races, book them with a bit of sense in mind, and don't go back to back with where you're going to put your body into a bit of a hole. For if you do a number of them back to back, it's going to take longer for you to come back out of it. And just on that point as well, what's also we see is runners would pick up injuries within the first number of weeks / months of a training plan. So during the off period, we want to, if you think of it like a house, like reaching the ceiling is you peaking for your race. What you don't want to let the body do is come to the basement for a long period of time, because then let's say, you're not prioritizing your recovery, and, some people might be out partying, which is nothing wrong. You can enjoy yourself as well, but keeping some element of capacity and training. So then, like, you're not dropping to the basement, you're dropping to floor one. It takes you less, you've got less then to climb. So a lot of times people will end up taking on a training plan that is a bit unrealistic for their current level of fitness. So when you do is making sure after an event, your body will naturally, you need time to rest and recover. And then don't be chasing those times too quick. Just allow that to come with consistency.
I'm always worried after a big race. Not worried, but I almost feel like my body needs to run to work. And I always think if I take too many days not running at all, things will start to break down and I'll get these niggles. Is that actually a thing, or is that in my head?
No, I think it comes back to, it's like, so you're at your level, like, you know, you almost kind of need to detrain a little bit in terms of you running so consistently. It's like cyclists in the Tour de France now, right? We were mentioning it before we were chatting, is when they finish, they will, you know, they'll do a bit of riding as well, because they can't go from doing all of that to absolutely nothing. I would say for someone who is used to running consistently is don't be afraid to back off for a couple of weeks and then just pick things up slowly. Like the chances are is if you go back in too fast and you try to run too fast too quickly, that's where you're going to pick. Like it takes a lot less loading cycles when you're running faster to pick up an injury. Whereas if you just go back and you just get your base again and just go nice and easy, then the chance of you picking up an injury will be less.
I think Rose said that, you know, people are very time restricted, and we addressed how maybe we can fit in those harder days, easy days. And I think I maybe know the answer to this now, but if there's just one bit of advice that you'd give people of the one thing that they should prioritize if they are time restricted that will help their recovery, what will that be?
One thing I would say is it's really useful to just sit down and write down the different areas that we know that help recovery, and you can score yourself. This is a nice practical takeaway, a bit of homework for everyone listening. And look at your sleep. Look at your nutrition. And it's not to be obsessive, it's just to identify areas that you feel you can improve on. And then it's about putting plans in place. So let's say you sit down and you reflect, and you're like, okay, I'm giving myself, if it was me doing it, I'd give myself maybe a 6 or 7 on sleep. I know the importance of it, but I'm quite bad at, you know, putting my laptop away in the evening because I'm self-employed. I run my business, so I'm always thinking I need to work. So I know that by reducing that screen time late at night, it's going to massively help. So for someone listening is look at what you think might be affecting your sleep, whether it's stress, whether it's you being on your screen too often, you don't have the right environment. And then the same thing with nutrition. Look at, are you getting adequate protein, adequate carbohydrates into your body to fuel for the demands of your training? And if not, okay, well, now you know it's great to have that score, but how can we bring that score up? It's keep it sustainable. Making big changes really quickly are going to be unrealistic to sustain that over a period of time. So it's just making these small little changes over time is what's going to create the habit, as you mentioned, Rose. Like recovery now for you is a habit, and you've done it for such a long time that you know the importance of it, and therefore you're able to achieve your recovery, which allows you to do what you do. So just make it realistic and keep it sustainable.
I think that's such a good message for our listeners, and so many great takeaways here. I mean, everyone knows recovery is important, but I do think it can feel like a bit of a minefield, and often it is just finding some easy wins in there. So I love that suggestion of writing it down and working out where those are. Yep. Aidan, thanks so much for coming on again and sharing all of that. I'm sure, you're going to help a lot of people achieve their goals through better recovery. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Hopefully I'll see you guys for the 4th episode soon.
Thanks for joining us at 5 Miles Easy.
See you next time.